Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, Azure, Agility and Security, No Need to Compromise. I'm Erica Lee, Vice President of Solution Marketing here at Tufin, and I'm pleased to be here with Yuval Perry, Product Manager for Azure Network Security at Microsoft, and Alon Buttaliano, Product Manager at Tufin. Today, we're going to discuss some challenges organizations have been dealing with for many, many years. First, that their networks continue to grow in scale and complexity. And second, that most organizations still lack a centralized, consolidated way of managing network security policy across those massive, ever-evolving environments. And certainly, most still lack a centralized way of managing network security policy holistically and seamlessly across on-premises and cloud. So during this session, we will let Yuval and Alon each give a brief overview of the Azure and Tufin solutions, and then we're going to dig in a bit on these challenges and some shifts we're seeing within organizations and among their security, network, and cloud teams as they seek to gain a holistic visibility and control. Yuval, would you like to begin?
Sure. Thank you, Erica. Hey, everyone. This is great to be here. I'm Yuval Perry, Product Manager for Azure Firewall. And in the next couple of minutes, I would like to have a short overview of Azure Firewall and touch on some of the key features. So in high level, Azure Firewall is a cloud-native firewall that has built-in high availability, auto-scalability, and zero maintenance. You can deploy and scale in minutes. You can secure network and application, east-west and north-south traffic. You can configure SNAT and DNAT configuration and leverage the built-in threat intelligence engine provided by Microsoft cybersecurity teams. We have 3 different tiers for different use cases and customers. We have the basic SKU for small and medium businesses. We have the standard SKU for enterprise and government organizations. And we have the premium SKU for high security environments. You can deploy and use the firewall in 3 main use cases. The first one is a VNet deployment, which is the most common one in hub and spoke model, where you can secure traffic between spoke VNets and subnets within VNets, and also traffic to the internet. You can optionally secure traffic from on-prem via express route or VPN gateway. The second use case is Virtual WAN, also known as Secure Hub, where the firewall is deployed inside a virtual WAN. You can secure traffic between VNets and branch offices. And the main advantage here is that you get automatic routing configuration to easily attract traffic to the firewall. You can also use the forced tunnel mode, where you take the on-premise traffic and break out to the internet using a third-party firewall, which is supported in the VNet approach only. Here you can find the key features and also compared by each firewall SKU. The main differences between the SKUs are the throughput, where basic supports 500 megabits and standard to premium goes all the way from 70 to 100 gigabit per second. The threat intelligence engine is supported in all firewalls, but in basic is only in alert mode. And the main differences for premium SKU are additional security features that are listed here. The first one is TLS inspection, mostly for outbound and east-west traffic. You can also have TLS termination for inbound traffic using Azure Application Gateway. TLS inspections allow us to analyze the traffic use it for additional security features like IDPS engine, where you can detect and block malicious traffic based on an updated database of signatures. Another feature is the URL filtering, where you can restrict user access to HTTP or HTTPS web content. And the last one is web categories, where you can define different rules and allow access based on different website categories like gambling, social media, etc. The entire knowledge between these features, the signature database, and the web categories are being maintained and updated by Azure with zero maintenance and zero action needed from your side. Using Azure Firewall, you can also easily integrate with other first-party integration, like with DDoS protection, to defend and mitigate against DDoS attack. You can also integrate with WAF, App Gateway, which is mostly focused on securing HTTP or HTTPS application from web attack. You can also integrate with private endpoints for whatever use case you might have. And also integrate with Sentinel to detect threats, define correlation rules, and also define automatic responsive, depends on your custom rules. So to sum up this introduction, so we see thousands of customers, including the majority of S500, relying on Azure Firewall for the day-to-day security in the cloud. Some customers use more than one cloud provider. And thanks to our partnership with Tufin, we can support these customers with multi-cloud workloads and bring them more value and easier management capabilities to better secure their environments. With that, I will hand it over to Alon.
That's great. Thank you, Yuval. And first of all, hello, everybody. As Erika mentioned, I'm Alon from Tufin's product management team. I'm very glad to be here. And obviously, thank you, everyone, for joining and for your time today. Yuval, I think that your slides were very interesting. And I can say that customers also shared with me the same advantages that you mentioned for Azure Firewall. And in the next couple of minutes and in the next slides, I would like to share how enterprises can benefit actually from both the security capabilities that Azure Firewall offers and that you mentioned, together with the centralized policy management capabilities that Tufin offers, so that enterprises can actually leverage both Azure Firewall and Tufin in the hybrid enterprise network. Because eventually we would like and think that with Tufin and Azure Firewall, organizations can really improve and manage security policies more efficiently and improve their security and also business agility. So let's see how. First, in a very high level for the attendees that are not familiar with Tufin, in 1 minute, Tufin provides basically a platform for security policy management. It means that we integrate with the leading security platforms, such as next generation firewalls, networking devices, private cloud, public clouds, as well as SASE technologies such as SD-WAN, and obviously we integrate with different vendors. And we create an abstraction layer and provide a single pane of glass to manage all these policies and to manage all the different policies via a single pane of glass to deliver a centralized visibility and control and security policy management. And basically our vision is to be the single solution in the enterprise to automate network security policy management across any vendor and also any environment. And basically Tufin actually acts as a hub in the network security ecosystem because, as I mentioned, we integrate with firewalls, networking devices, SASE technologies, and more. But we also integrate with ticketing system, for example, or such as Remedy or ServiceNow, as well as vulnerability scanners, such as Rapid7 and more. We also integrate with IP address management. And by that, with all the different integrations, we actually enable our customers to have end-to-end zero-touch automation, because we allow enterprises to unify cloud network and network security processes together by centralizing the visibility and control and change automation, everything together, as you can see in the diagram. And since enterprises actually unify the different processes, the different platforms together, it also accelerates the security policy management and makes things much more efficient. And since many things are unified together, and since the security policy management is automated and accelerated, it also minimizes the risk of a breach or a non-compliance with internal security mandates or external regulations. And basically, as you can see here, you can see in the supported platforms and platforms that we already integrate here, Microsoft Azure, because we integrate with Azure for pretty long time. We have many capabilities that we offer for the network security groups, as well as for the VNet with topology understanding and with change automation and more. But we actually recently even extended our partnership with Azure and improved our partnership and extended our support to support also Azure Firewall. And I think that it makes perfectly sense, because as Yuval mentioned previously, many customers secure their cloud environment with Azure Firewall. But we also know that many enterprises are running across hybrid environments. So they can have also additional firewalls which are running on premise. It could be from various vendors. They can also have different clouds from multi-vendors, and they can also have a private cloud in addition to the public cloud. And what we see, based on feedback that we get from our customers and based on our experience in the market, is that basically managing each one of the network security policies separately from all the different technologies, from all the different vendors, simply affect the business security and agility. And this is what we want to improve, because we help, as I mentioned, to centrally manage the security policies in the hybrid environment from all the different vendors, platforms, and technologies centrally via Tufin. So what we've done for Azure Firewall in the initial releases that we had, and again, we had few key features, but the key features are just for the initial releases, and obviously this will be enhanced even more in the upcoming versions. But in the first releases, we have few key features. The first one is that we provide real-time visibility for the Azure Firewall policies. It means that we provide our customers the ability to see all the different policies and control them via a single pane of glass, including Azure Firewall and the network security groups, etc., via Tufin. We also enable our customers to get a change tracking for all the policies, for all the changes in the Azure Firewall policies with an automated audit trail. For all the changes, to make sure that everything is documented in case that there was a misconfiguration or a risky change that was made, and in case that there is any network outage, everything is documented so it can be troubleshooted and also used for reverse engineering and more future purposes. So this is for real-time visibility. But we also provide our customers the ability to search for rules across the hybrid environment via a single pane of glass across all the vendors, including Azure Firewall policies. It means that if, for example, a network engineer or a firewall engineer or anyone in the organization wants to find a rule which allows access to a certain application or a certain IP or workload, it can be searched via Tufin for across the entire environment instead of going into each one of the different consoles manually, and even within one vendor without going into each one of the security policies. Everything can be viewed and identified much more easily via Tufin, via a very flexible and advanced policy search engine using what we call the Tufin query language, and I will show it in a moment. And what we also do and provide for the Azure Firewall policies is basically via the interactive topology map, because we visualized the entire network of the environment and the entire network of the customer or the entire hybrid environment in a topology map, which is updated dynamically and automatically. And based on that, based on the information that we retrieve from all the different platforms, based on the networking configuration, the UDRs, and based on the security configurations, we also provide our customers to troubleshoot network connectivity and to identify how traffic flows in the environment and whether each one of the connections or the traffic flows is allowed or blocked based on the security and networking configuration, to troubleshoot both east-west connectivity between two spoke VNets, for example, in Azure, and also north-south connectivity from on-premise to Azure. So it's very, very useful, especially now when we see that the number of applications grows more and more teams are involved in the change process in the cloud. So let's see some of the new features. So first, as I mentioned, we provide a centralized policy visibility. It means that via Tufin, it's possible to see all the different policies of all the different vendors. And you can see in the left side what we call the device tree. And you can see platforms from different vendors, including Azure, of course, including the VNets and the network security groups and the Azure firewall policies. So it simply means that it's much faster to view all the different policies. And we present pretty much everything as it appears in the Azure portal. So you can see the network rules, destination NAT rules, application rules, and obviously, as I mentioned, the network security groups and more. And whenever there was a change for the policy, we create what we call a revision. It means that something has been changed in the policy. It could be a role that was modified or changed or deleted and more. And we highlight what was the change, and we provide a very intuitive side-by-side comparison to understand what was the change, and obviously to track all the changes so that it can be used for any purpose. It could be for audit preparation, it could be for troubleshooting, it could be to see if there was any risky change or misconfiguration. So we see that it's very, very useful to have all the changes documented, because many times, especially now when we know that multiple teams are involved in the change process in the cloud, many changes are simply not documented. As I mentioned, we also provide our customers to search for policies. So you can see what we call the rule viewer, which is another tool in SecureTrack, same as the previous tool that you saw in SecureTrack, which is our base component and the core product of our suite. And basically, the rule viewer allows to search for rules across the hybrid environment. And here you can see, for example, a search query with different operators and conditions and so on. But basically, the rule tries to see all the rules in the environment which provide access to RDP for different destination IPs. And obviously it can be enhanced more, but you can see that it very easily finds and highlights all the rules which allow access to RDP in the environment. You can see in that case, rules which allow access to the Azure firewall policies and other Fortinet device and other network security group. And again, if you think about it without Tufin, simply what would happen is that a network admin, for example, would go to the Azure NSG and then to the Fortinet device and then to the Azure firewall, which simply takes much more time. So we want to improve the operational efficiency and to improve the time that it takes to find rules. And you can see another example below, which of a search query, which simply search for all the rules in the environment, which has overlay permissive, which means that all these rules basically provide access to any source or any IP or to a very wide range of IPs or services. So it actually increases the attack surface. It's simply a risky rule. And we want to provide a very easy identification of all these rules across the hybrid environment for all the different policies. So it's something that can help even to improve the security within the environment. And obviously, again, it could be enhanced and modified even more. So we saw the policy visibility, as I mentioned, as well as the policy searches. And another key capability that we have for the Azure firewall policies is via the topology map by visualizing the network topology. As I mentioned, we integrate with all the different platforms. We retrieve the networking configuration as well as the security configuration. And based on that, we visualize what the network looks like. So this is useful by itself because customers don't need to, for example, maintain a Visio. Everything is updated dynamically and automatically. But what is more interesting is that, as I mentioned, we provide the ability to troubleshoot network connectivity with the path analysis tool. So what can happen is that network admins or anyone in the organization can simply insert source, destination IP, and also a service, and Tufin will visualize the path and also present whether the traffic is allowed or not in each one of the security enforcement points in the path. So by that, you can see an example that the rule is allowed, or the traffic is allowed more accurately, in the network security groups, in each one of the steps in the spoke VNets as well as in the hub VNets, but the traffic is actually blocked by the Azure firewall. And we provide even a more granular view by clicking on the Azure firewall and see what are the matching rules for the search query. And in that case, you can see that there is actually a rule which blocks HTTP traffic. So it's very useful to understand whether the traffic is allowed or not for each one of the, for example, access requests that implementations team get. And it's also very easy to understand and identify where is the problem or whether something is already implemented. So this is an example of a query for HTTP traffic, but on the other hand, if, for example, someone would query for HTTPS traffic, you can see that the traffic is allowed by each one of the network security enforcement point, as well as the Azure firewall, because there is actually a rule which allows access for HTTPS. So it's very useful for the multiple different teams which work in the cloud to understand where the problem is or whether the configuration meets the actual need. And obviously, these are examples of east-west traffic. So you can see traffic that flows between VNets with the VNet peering and so on. But it's also possible to troubleshoot north-south connectivity. And you can see another example of traffic that flows from the on-premise to the cloud via Azure firewall, via another Fortinet device, which is connected in an IPsec tunnel. And I think that this is a classic example that we can also elaborate more. But in that case, you can see that the traffic is allowed by the Azure firewall as well as by the Fortinet device on premise, which is the area in which mainly the network security team handles. But the traffic is actually blocked by a rule which specifically blocks RDP traffic in the spoke VNet. So in that case, it's very useful and easy to understand why the traffic is not allowed, why there is someone who complains that the traffic is blocked, and where is the problem. So to summarize very quickly the key benefits of the integration that we have so far. First, we provide centralized visibility, as I mentioned, which simply improves operational efficiency, to identify rules much more quickly, to troubleshoot network connectivity much more quickly, and also to reduce the attack surface because we provide the visibility into the overlay permissive rules, as well as misconfiguration and all the changes which are documented. We also reduce the time and resources which are required for network troubleshooting in the hybrid network. And generally speaking, I think that we help to improve the collaboration between the different teams that we see in the cloud and the multiple implementations team which are involved in the change process. And obviously, these were just the initial capabilities that we provide in our initial results, but stay tuned and we encourage you to reach out and speak to us so that we can also share the future plans that we have. And with that, back to you, Arika.
All right, thank you guys. So let's dig into a few questions. Many organizations obviously have many multi-cloud hybrid applications that are leveraging on-premises resources. How are network security teams impacted by this? How are they dealing with it today? And how would you suggest they handle it in the future? Yuval, do you want to start?
Sure. So I think that one perspective to this challenge is that we see an increasing number of enterprises transitioning more and more of their workloads to the cloud. This migration might take some time and also require some adjustments. But we need to keep in mind that enforcing the network connectivity and the security is a 24/7 task that they need to handle, which might add overhead to this process. So I think that cloud vendors like Azure and management products like Tufin need and in fact provide the right tools to allow more visibility and to make their day-to-day task as easy as it can. But I would love also to hear Alon on that.
Yeah, sure. First, I definitely agree. And I think that that's a very interesting question, actually, Erika, because in my opinion, the way in which applications are deployed actually affected and even reshaped many things in network security, including some new roles and responsibilities, as I mentioned a few times. And if we think about it first from a very low level, I would say, what hybrid applications mean many times is that applications simply have components or workloads or resources both on-premise and in the cloud, or even in multi-cloud or even a hybrid cloud. And it could be, for instance, an application that is maybe hosted in the cloud, but leverages financial data on-premise or Active Directory on-premise or authentication services on-premise, for example. And this application actually requires end-to-end access enabled from on-premise to the cloud resources between the different workload. And as I mentioned previously, having this access enabled end-to-end mainly requires a joint effort of multiple teams with different responsibilities, because, for example, one team can manage the on-premise connectivity and also the hub, and maybe a different team manage the connectivity in the spoke VNets or a different area in the cloud. And this simply increases the time that it takes to implement this access when there is any need for a change, for a new application, or for a new change that should happen, and also increases the SLA, because, as I mentioned, each team has to implement the change in its relevant domain or side or area. And many times there is no unified visibility end to end, and each team is simply working in silos, and it's not very clear where the problem exists. As I mentioned before, is it an NSG problem configuration which blocks the traffic, or firewall on premise which blocks the traffic, or maybe even it's not a security problem but a networking problem instead, like routing configuration and so on. And it's not only that multiple teams are involved, as I mentioned, but also multiple security controls from multiple vendors with different technologies that actually secure these applications. As I mentioned, it could be an Azure firewall in the cloud, another Palo Alto Fortinet checkpoint device on premise, which secures the application. So this actually, I think, increases the complexity of managing the network security for all of these applications even more. So as Yuval mentioned, I think that it's very important for the different teams to have the right tools. And as I mentioned, I think that it's important to unify the different teams into a single process, into a single solution, like Tufin, for example, and to manage access for these applications, for these hybrid applications more efficiently. And as I showed before, we provide some capabilities and tools that can help with that, like the centralized policy visibility for all the different policies to unify them, or the ability to troubleshoot connectivity end-to-end across all the platforms, and to understand what specifically blocks the traffic and whether the network is configured properly. And another ability is, of course, to automate access requests and to automate the change process. But yeah, I definitely agree with Yuval. It's just important to have the right tools for it.
So you mentioned different teams emerging in the cloud, and we know that we're seeing some shifts as far as responsibility goes across those different teams. Would you mind expanding on that a little bit? And what are we seeing as far as the shift in those responsibilities and the challenges and conflicts that might create?
Yeah, I think that it's one of the most interesting topics in the cloud, the responsibilities and the ownership there. And first, as I already mentioned, when it comes to the cloud, we see two main teams which should work together in the cloud. The network security teams, which are responsible for the on-premise and in most cases also the border in the cloud. It could be the hub VNet, for example, and the different team Sometimes they call cloud operations, sometimes they are DevOps, or a different team, which is in charge of the spokes in the cloud or the business units. And I think that these are the two main, there are two main challenges or conflicts that we see with these roles and responsibilities. And the first one is that actually, as I mentioned, each team is working in silos without unified end-to-end visibility and unified process and clear understanding what the other team does in its relevant area. But maybe a bigger problem is what we described, and you also mentioned it, Erica, the trying to balance between security and business agility between these two teams, because whenever there is any security change, for example, for deploying a new application or enabling connectivity, security teams require many security checks, approvals, and vulnerability assessments, and more as part of the process, which are very important. We all agree that, and they improve the security. But on the other hand, they also slows down the process and affect the business agility. So, for example, when a DevOps or a cloud operation or even a developer need to perform an access change in the cloud, security teams are seeing many times as a bottleneck. This is what they simply report and share with us. And on the other hand, DevOps, they want to move as fast as possible with CI/CD processes, automation tool, infrastructure as a code, and they enable business agility. But if there are not enough security checks and approvals and so on, the security might be affected. So we heard from customers that it many times led to misconfiguration because someone simply wanted to move very fast and enable connectivity, but eventually enabled access to any source IP or any protocol, and this simply increased the attack surface, and then a security breach happened. But we've also heard from customers that there was a lot of pressure, and there is a lot of pressure on network security teams and implementations team to reduce the SLA and the time that it takes to implement the change, because IT teams get simply hundreds of tickets per month for changes that should happen and should implement, and changes that actually affect the business. So I think that there is no magic solution for that, but we believe that the main way to solve it is with automation and to reduce manual processes. And as I mentioned several times, to unify the different teams, the different processes, and the different platforms, and by that actually to accelerate the security policy management. And this is basically what Tufin does. As I mentioned, we help enterprises to provide their capabilities to balance between business security and agility, which is the main challenge that we see between these two teams. For example, we provide a unified security automation process for both on-premise and the cloud. So, for example, for whenever there is any access request that should happen, Tufin can automatically identify the relevant target security controls in the path based on the topology, as I just showed before. So, for example, the target could be an NSG, a firewall on-premise, and so on. So, and then for each one of the security enforcement points, Tufin can also identify and understand whether there is any change that should happen to implement the access request, and with a dedicated tool called verifier, we basically highlight whether the access is allowed or blocked in each one of the security enforcement points based on the requested access. And we simply save a lot of investigation time, because if the access is already implemented, then the ticket could be closed, for example. And based on that calculation, based on the verification, as I mentioned, and based on the target selection, we can also then design the change and help the network security teams to understand how the access request can be implemented, whether a new rule should be added or a rule should be modified. So basically, we can satisfy both teams in that case. And again, this is obviously just one example, but obviously we have additional capabilities that can help to reduce the conflict between those two teams.
Yeah.
And it's yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You touched on a couple of things here. So first of all, Yuval, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about what Azure Firewall, what you're delivering with Azure Firewall to improve efficiency across these teams. And then I would like to circle back to some of the challenges that Alon was just referring to as far as providing access in a seamless way with the growing applications and workloads that we're facing. So take a moment and talk about what Azure is doing to improve efficiency.
Sure. So just to add to the challenges that Alon mentioned, so we see that actually security features today are deeply integrated and actually part of the same products to manage the network. For example, in Azure Firewall, we see that we have the IDPS engine, TLS inspection, URL filtering, that's already integrated within the firewall. So that makes the conflict or friction between the teams, between the network security and the cloud operation teams, even stronger because they use the same interface and they need to coordinate very well. So I definitely agree with Alon on the unifying approach and as well as trying to automate as many processes as we can. Regarding your second question of how Azure can help in this area, so it's actually relates to what Alon said about the automation. So let's take the maintenance perspective. So the network security team or the cloud operations team usually need to take care of auto scaling, high availability, and upgrades. But Azure Firewall, the cloud native firewall, handles all of that automatically, leaving them more time to focus on their specific needs in their environments. And as I mentioned before, from a security perspective, so they get lots of security value already integrated and built in, so they just need to turn it on with a click of a button. They can use the threat intelligence engine, the IDPS, and the TLS inspection with the premium firewall. Also, and they're all, let's take the IDPS and threat intelligence, they're all being updated behind the scenes with the most recent threats. This is also to make the day-to-day job easier and focus on what matters to them in their specific needs. Alon, would you like to touch on how Tufin helps in this area?
Yes, definitely. I think that first, as I mentioned, I think that the main way that Tufin would like to help is to reduce manual processes and to automate basically as much as possible and to accelerate many of the processes and the tasks that network security teams have. For example, Tufin can reduce the time and resources which are spent on other preparations because all the changes in the Azure firewall policies and other platforms, of course, are documented and tracked and can be compared very easily. And it's also very easy to find rules which are risky or overly permissive via the rule viewer that we just presented. So there is no need to manually go into each one of the policies, view the policies there, and then correlate all the information or try to search for rules across all in each one of the different security policies. And obviously, the network troubleshooting, as I mentioned before, which simply provide much faster troubleshooting process to troubleshoot east-west access within Azure or north-south traffic. And this is a very time-consuming task that we see among enterprises because whenever there is any change which happened or required, many times the different implementations team just they just need to implement the change, but many times there is friction where the change should happen, who is responsible for managing the change, and many times it's not very clear where the problem exists. And as I mentioned, maybe obviously the biggest help of Tufin with that is with automating the network access requests. with tools like the verifier, and which verifies whether the access is already implemented, and with the designer tool, which can simply design the required policy change, and much more tools. And I think that it's very interesting, and we also spoke about it before, that basically Azure Firewall and Tufin are completely different solutions and product, but we simply try to address the same problem and need that we see in the market, but from different perspective.
Okay, thank you. We're up against time at this point. I did want to give you both an opportunity though to talk about some real world examples that you have, maybe some customer cases that you could speak to better illustrate what we've been talking about. And while they're doing that, those of you listening in, feel free to chat in your questions. We probably will not be getting to questions on this one since we've run over, but we will follow up with you offline afterwards. But any customer cases alone, Yuval, you want to talk about some examples?
Yes, I can jump in to start. I think we have a classic example of a very large European retailer. They are Azure customer, of course, but they also have hundreds of Palo Alto firewalls in that case on premise and Cisco routers, and they were migrating. They were during the migration from on-premise to Azure, and they have multiple network operations team that manage the connectivity and firewall changes on premise, and a completely different group which manage the cloud security and enable the changes and the access in the cloud. And they simply shared with us that they struggled to meet audit requirements, mainly since they didn't have a well-defined change process. Since the cloud operation team managed the change process via one tool, they got requests from Jira, and the different tool, the operation teams managed the change process via a completely different tool, and they got requests from ServiceNow. So first, what happened is that not all the changes in their environment were documented properly. And they also didn't have any reporting across the hybrid environment, across all the changes that happened there. And the security teams simply told us that they were not aware of many security changes that happened in Azure because no one was documenting them, and they simply didn't have any visibility for them. They also shared with us that the cloud operations team managed or implemented changes in Azure, but once they done with the changes, with implementing the changes, they found out that actually there is no end-to-end connectivity or access as the request was implemented. And then the cloud operation team opened a ticket for the operations team to enable the changes in the on-premise environment, in the Palo Alto firewalls, because they thought that this is where the problem is. But then once the operation team finished the job and they implemented the changes in the Palo Alto side, they found out that there actually was another NSG in the cloud which was still blocking the traffic. So it was a very time-consuming task and very inefficient, and they realized that they need to have a single solution and a single automation solution for the entire process and changes. And basically they achieved it. They achieved it with Tufin. They now have an automated network change process across both on-premise and also Azure. And they shared with us that the time and the effort which spent on the change implementation was reduced by around 50 or even 60%. And these two teams or groups simply work much better together now because they have visibility into each other works, because Tufin provides the centralized visibility into all the policies, as I mentioned, and they simply troubleshoot the connectivity one that's much faster. And if we, Erica, just maybe we can share also some tips here around just the success that the customers had. And I think that what I learned from their journey and what we always recommend to our customers is to start slow and move in a phased approach. Because, for example, they didn't try to automate changes in a zero-touch automation on day one. They started with getting centralized visibility first for both the Palo Alto and the Azure firewall policies and the NSGs. They then continued with embedding reporting in the process, and then they leveraged the topology map for network troubleshooting on a regular basis. And only then they started to automate the process. So I think that it was very successful in their case to have a phased approach. But interesting to see also in Azure whether there is something similar.
Right, Yuval?
Sure. So I can speak about an Atlanta-based company that designs, build, and implement solution in the supply chain field. They work with a wide range of customers from e-commerce, groceries, healthcare organizations. And it needless to say that any security incident or an issue their customers have might harm people in a warehouse or just cost a lot of money due to delay or other issues in the network. They partner with Microsoft and selected a set of security products, including Azure Firewall Premium, to leverage the security value that comes with the premium. And speaking with them, they say that for example, the cloud native scaling is very important for them to ensure high availability of 99.99% to their customers and meet the SLA and other agreements with the customers. So I think that's a great example of customer that has a variety of challenges between different customers and actually leverage the benefits of moving to the cloud and using cloud native firewalls. And to relate to what Alon said, so I definitely agree with the phased approach. We need to take the time to maybe reconsider old concepts and ideas while transitioning to the cloud and see how customers can really leverage the benefits and automations that we can provide.
Thank you. Thank you very much, both of you. For those of you who've chatted questions in, if you've chatted questions in, we will follow up with you offline. We thank you very much for your time today, and we look forward to doing this again. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.